Sir Humphrey Gilbert and Bartholomew Gosnold both fell short of finding Verrazzano's Refugio. Entering this bay, which he called Gosnold's Hope, he pulled into the first island on the right, which is now called Cuttyhunk. This odd name comes from the Wampanoag Indian name for the island, Pocahontas, meaning Land's End. Two of Gosnold's shipmates, John Brereton and Gabriel Archer, each wrote in-depth reports about the mission. Brereton explains that the crew built a wooden fort on an island in a pond at the western end of the island. In the early 1900s, the South Dartmouth Historical Society erected a stone tower on this island in a pond in the west end of Cutttyhunk. However, some modern researchers think that the island in the pond actually refers to Slate Island, which is in Cuttyhunk Pond. As much as I admire all the hard work that the South Dartmouth Historical Society put into their stone tower, I tend to agree with these modern researchers for several reasons. First, Cutttyhunk Pond is a saltwater pond that opens into Cutttyhunk Harbor. Gosnold's boat, the Concord, was 50 feet long, so they could have anchored it in the well-protected Cutttyhunk Harbor and rowed into Cutttyhunk Pond to the island. The expedition had two flat-ended rowboats that could each hold a dozen people. The rowboats were cleverly designed so they could be attached flat end to flat end to make a more seaworthy vessel holding 24 men. On the other hand, West End Pond is a shallow, tidal pond with brackish water. A small stream allows salt water to enter in at high tide, and then it drains back out brackish water at low tide. This brackish water is why modern entrepreneurs have made this pond into an oyster farm. The stream is so shallow, about a foot to a foot and a half deep, even the small 12-man rowboat couldn't get up it. The boat would have to be dragged over the sandy barrier beach. Furthermore, anchoring the Concord just offshore near West End Pond is asking for trouble. Not only is this location exposed to the open ocean, it's at the confluence of Vineyard Sound and Buzzards Bay, where the currents are strong and unpredictable. At low tide, what is now called Sow and Pig's Reef can be seen jutting a mile out from the western tip of Cutttyhunk. Sow is a big rock and Pigs are a cluster of small rocks. All navigators know enough to keep their distance from such dangers. Another reason modern researchers think Gosnold's fort was on Slate Island and not West End Pond Island comes from a clue in John Brereton's report. Brereton writes that Elizabeth Island is 16 miles in circumference. Well, Cutttyhunk is only about 7 miles in circumference, and neighboring Noshon Island is only about 13 miles in circumference. Researchers suggest that the two islands were connected back in the 1600s, and since then a hurricane has blown a gap in the barrier beach that once joined them. Thus, if John Brereton's 16-mile circumference refers to the combined islands, that puts Slate Island and Cutttyhunk Pond towards the western end, just as he reports. This romantic depiction of Gosnold's island and fort was done in 1858 by Albert Bierstadt. Though the artist might have been envisioning the island in West End Pond, it has a similar ethereal feel to this picture I took at Slate Island at sunset. Jeffrey Phipps Brain and a team of archaeologists from the Harvard Peabody Museum in Cambridge, Massachusetts, recently did archaeological digs on both West End and Slate Islands. Though they found numerous artifacts, none of them rendered conclusive evidence about where Gosnold and company had built their fort. While his men were building the fort, Gosnold and a few crewmates made several day trips to explore Buzzards Bay. They explored Haps Hill, a small island which is now called Pennikees Island, just north of Cutttyhunk Harbor. They crossed Buzzards Bay, or as they called it, Gosnold's Hope, and sailed up what is now New Bedford Fairhaven Harbor to where it narrows at Acushnet. Gosnold explored further westward along the northern coast of Buzzards Bay to Haps Hill, which is Round Hill in South Dartmouth, and he saw the distinctive white sands of Horseneck Beach at the entrance to Westport Harbor. But he apparently never pushed further westward. He never made it around Saconnet Point in Little Compton to see Aquidneck Island or find the entrance to Refugio, the Dee River, Narragansett Bay. Meanwhile, back at the fort, the crew made a discovery. The mission's provisioner, Bartholomew Gilbert, who was probably a nephew of Sir Humphrey Gilbert, had only brought 6 weeks' worth of supplies, not 6 months' worth, as was originally planned. The crew got surly and refused to winter over and risk starvation on the cold island. So after only about a 3-week stay, from May 25th to June 18th, much of which was spent building the fort and trading with Indians, they journeyed back to England with a shipload of cedar logs, sassafras, and furs, to at least give their investors a little profit. But Gosnold's mission did little to spark a grand colonization momentum in England. Edward Hayes contributed a short letter of commendation that was printed in John Brereton's report. Sir Walter Raleigh had gotten himself in hot water with King James and found himself imprisoned in the Tower of London. Henry Wriothesley actually did help out with Martin Pring's 1603 expedition from Bristol, England to Cape Cod, but Pring's intent was not to set up a colony. He only stayed long enough to buy a boatload of furs, which he sold for a nice profit. In 1605, Henry Wriothesley and his brother-in-law, Sir Thomas Arundel, made plans for a Catholic colony and to find Refugio on the east coast of America. But the man they chose to lead the mission, George Weymouth, convinced them to colonize further north, in Maine, where the fish were more plentiful. As the sun set on Cuttyhunk and I ferried back to my car in New Bedford, I wondered if history would have taken a different course if either Sir Humphrey Gilbert or Bartholomew Gosnold had reached Refugio. I believe they would have been inspired by the John D. Tower, which I suggest was built in 1582 by Anthony Brigham and his crew of 80 men, and the 1583 colony, or Gosnold's 1602 colony. Both of them would have taken root. With such a grand stone and mortar temple of harmony, all built and waiting, Sir Humphrey Gilbert would have had his throne room, and Gosnold's crew wouldn't have wasted 3 weeks building their small wooden fort. Both Gilbert and Gosnold were so near, but yet so far. Despite the fact that neither Gilbert nor Gosnold found Refugio, and each only visited the New World for less than a month, the reports of their ventures planted seeds in the minds of the English, who, by the 1640s, were swarming to New England. Gilbert's hope and Gosnold's hope became the colonial settlers' hope. The previous sentence about hope sounds metaphorical, but it's meant to be taken quite literally. The code symbol for Gilbert's 1583 mission to the Dee River was the anchor of hope. In his appeal to the Queen to, open quote, send forth a sailing expedition to build a steadfast watch post, close quote, John Dee uses the symbol the anchor of hope. Just before Gilbert and his fleet set sail, the Queen sent him, using Sir Walter Raleigh, his brother, as a courier, a jewel-studded brooch. On the front was an image of the Queen holding a gold anchor encrusted with 29 diamonds. On the back was written, Tumor sub sacra ancora, or be safeguarded by the sacred anchor. This is a reference to the anchor of hope quote in the Hebrews 18:20 of the Bible. When the colonial leaders of Rhode Island and Providence plantations adopted the anchor of hope as the symbol for their colony in the 1600s, the first governor, Benedict Arnold, put the anchor and his initials on the official governor's seal, and it is still the state motto and symbol today. Also, in maps of the 1600s, Narragansett Bay is sometimes referred to as Anchor Bay. Thus, it's quite curious that in 1602, Bartholomew Gosnold named Buzzard's Bay Gosnold's Hope, instead of the more obvious Gosnold's Bay. Perhaps Gosnold felt he had actually found Refugio, and he was making a subtle reference to the symbol of the Gilbert and Dee mission of 1583, the anchor of hope.